Flannery O'Connor was a Southern American writer and essayist. Her full name is Mary Flannery O'Connor, but for writing purposes she preferred not to include her first name. While O'Connor lived a rather isolated life, she left a remarkable impact on literature whilst overcoming a great deal of challenges in her life. Mary Flannery O'Connor was born on March 25, 1925 in Savannah, Georgia. She was an only child and didn't have the best of dispositions. She described herself as a child as having a leave me alone or I'll bite you complex. She had a brief moment of celebrity when she appeared on television for having trained a chicken to walk backwards, which she claims was the climax of her life. Everything else paled in comparison. In 1937, her father was diagnosed with lupus and died when O'Connor was 15. O'Connor graduated from the Georgia State College for Women in 1945 with a social sciences degree. In 1946, she was accepted into the prestigious Iowa Writers' Workshop, a great accomplishment for the recent graduate. In 1945, O'Connor met and eventually accepted an invitation to stay with Robert Fitzgerald, a well-known translator of the classics, and his wife Sally in Redding, Connecticut. During this time, she explored different genres and published some short stories. Despite her sheltered life, O'Connor demonstrated an intuitive knowledge of human nature. In 1951, Flannery O'Connor was diagnosed with lupus just like her father. It was during this period of her life, whilst battling lupus, where some of her most popular short stories and novels were published. She moved back to her farm in Andalusia, where she became fascinated with birds and raised hundreds of different species of birds. O'Connor never married. Her only companionship was her mother and some correspondence. She died in August of 1964 at age 37 and was buried in Georgia. O'Connor's most popular works include the two novels Wise Blood and The Violent Bear It Away. Her most popular short story is without a doubt A Good Man is Hard to Find, but some other well-known short stories include Everything That Rises Must Converge and The Life You Save May Be Your Own. O'Connor wrote 2 novels, 31 short stories, and several collections, even a prayer journal. Flannery O'Connor enjoyed focusing on the more grotesque side of writing. Her writing style can be defined as Southern Gothic style. The settings of her stories took place almost exclusively in the South, featuring characters that were morally flawed. One of her trademark techniques is foreshadowing. She gave the reader an idea of how the story would end. While many of her stories had disturbing elements, she didn't like to be characterized as cynical. O'Connor was deeply influenced by Roman Catholicism. She wrote ironic, subtly allegorical fiction about deceptively backward Southern characters, usually fundamentalist Protestants who undergo transformations of character that to her thinking brought them closer to the Catholic mind. O'Connor would often ask existential questions in her works by having characters question the existence of God or how the world works. She also liked to touch on sensitive topics and issues of the time period, such as race or poverty. O'Connor uses such characters' inability to come to terms with race, poverty, and fundamentalism, other than in sentimental allusions, as an example of the failure of the secular world in the 20th century. Mary Flannery O'Connor received her first recognition in the literary community when she was accepted into the prestigious Iowa Writers' Workshop in 1946. In 1972, O'Connor won the U.S. National Book Award for Fiction, and was also named the Best of the National Book Awards in 2009. Mary Flannery O'Connor also has an award named after her by the University of Georgia, called the Flannery O'Connor Award for Short Fiction, which is usually awarded to an outstanding collection of short fictional stories every year. I originally chose Flannery O'Connor because I flipped open my textbook and randomly picked the first author I saw. But after learning more about her life and reading some of her stories, I actually found myself enjoying the stories and her style of writing with its satirical sense of humor, which is very similar to my own. Flannery O'Connor accomplished a lot in the short time she lived. The stories she published lived on and still affect people today. She didn't let her disease affect how she lived or let her stop writing, a trait which I find to be quite admirable.